Welcome to Rice Public Radio. We're covering cancel culture today and woke vocabulary, so buckle up. The first thing I want to talk about is cancel culture. You can call it cancel culture, call out culture, whatever. But it's become the forefront of left discussion these several months. I think it warrants its own in-depth episode, but cancel culture has taken a hold of YouTube, social media, Twitter, newsrooms, etc., etc. From calling out Karens to the Harper's letter on ideological diversity to Barry Weiss leaving the New York Times, there's a lot to be said. Now, call out / cancel culture usually happens in social media, like Twitter, where someone calls out or shames an individual for a controversial act, like a statement, picture, or video. Then the pressure mounts as more and more individuals join in on the criticism. Oftentimes, a person's employer is targeted and pressured into firing the individual in question. Now, this is probably the most toxic element of call-out culture because relatively powerless people can have their lives ruined and their employment terminated or jeopardized for fairly arbitrary things. On the other hand, it's pretty difficult to cancel powerful or extremely famous people like Donald Trump, Jeff Bezos, J.K. Rowling, Joe Rogan, and the list goes on. Cancel culture has been around for many years, but I think one of the reasons why it has exploded back onto the scene is due to the recent protests and discussions in response to George Floyd's death. People are rightfully thinking about ways to tackle racism, prejudice, and hate. Nonetheless, this comes with intellectual and ideological boundaries on how to make sense of the moment and the discussions of race inequality, injustice, and so on. There are instances where actions are clearly outside the realm of acceptable behavior, such as hate, discrimination, violence against others, racism, homophobia, misogyny, etc. However, opinions on how we interpret and respond to the current injustices, along with the treatment of race, class, capitalism, and so forth, vary widely and require lively debate and earnest discussion to sort things out. This is where cancel culture operates to curb actions and ideas deemed controversial or simply not within the boundaries of acceptable discussion. Now, the common argument for cancel culture is that only racists and bad people need to be worried, and their punishment is justified. But as the brilliant journalist Matt Taibbi has written in his recent pieces for Substack, there were scores of incidents that led to the resignation or firing of individuals who were involved in some pretty trivial or mundane incidents. Noteworthy dismissals include now ex-New York Times editorial page editor James Bennett, who greenlit Senator Tom Cotton's piece titled "Send in the Troops." Okay, now Tom Cotton is a piece of crap, and he's a terrible human being, but having to resign over the publication of a different but perhaps controversial viewpoint snuffs out intellectual debate. Another incident that Matt Taibbi covered was the controversy that involved Intercept investigative journalist Li Fang, who I think is a fantastic investigative reporter. However, he came under fire on Twitter and nearly lost his job because he posted an interview of a black man who stated the need to acknowledge black-on-black crime. An analyst was fired after retweeting a study suggesting nonviolent protests were more effective than violent ones. The Philadelphia Inquirer's top editor resigned after running a headline stating, "Buildings matter too." You can read the rest of Matt Taibbi's articles regarding cancel culture and the constriction of speech and debate on the website www.taibbi.substack.com. He's a fantastic writer, and he also co-hosts a podcast with Katie Halper called Useful Idiots on the Rolling Stone YouTube page. Now, personally, would I have done these things? Would I have run these headlines? Probably not. But we have to challenge these opinions and viewpoints based on their merit instead of attacking the initiator. As Matt Taibbi cautions, this limits the scope of intellectual discussion and presents only safe viewpoints in agreement with one another rather than differences that need to be debated on. This is especially true for working in the media, in an industry that desperately needs to expand and shift the Overton window on a variety of political topics. Intellectual diversity is sorely needed, and this even includes ideas that are horrid and terrible. Now, in the end, cancel culture generally ends up affecting relatively powerless people: university professors, journalists, writers, people up and down the company ladder. Now, this might seem like a wide range of people, but is cancel culture going to catch anybody that should be canceled? You have Jeff Bezos, the richest man on earth that treats his employees like garbage. You have the buffoon Donald Trump. There's Steve Mnuchin, the Walton family, CEOs from Big Pharma and other industries. The list goes on. There's a point where you're so high up on the societal or political food chain that you're basically uncancelable. Now, I just want to talk about something that happened to my friend. So, story time. I had a friend who was recently canceled and called out on Facebook. I played high school football with this guy, but I didn't know him super well because he and I hung out with different groups. He said some horrifically racist things through social media. I think it was through Twitter, but I'm not, super sure of the platform. But his comments were screenshotted, and another friend of mine managed to get a hold of them and made a Facebook post about it. It definitely shocked me and my other friends who saw the Facebook post and saw the screen caps. A lot of people, including we were shocked and disappointed. Some people started looking up his employer and made calls into his workplace in an attempt to get him fired. I don't know what happened after this, but that's kind of an example of cancel culture that happened to someone I knew personally. Just to be clear, I've never publicly asked for someone to be fired. I think it's wrong to target someone's livelihood, especially if that person's a regular working class person. However, there's absolutely no question that my friend said some terrible and awful things. I'm not downplaying it, I'm not sugarcoating it, I'm not excusing it. But one of the problems I see with cancel culture is that canceling someone, it's never really about having a meaningful, honest discussion over a disagreement or something that hurt someone. The act itself is usually proof that the person is flawed and beyond redemption, and punishment is warranted, although no one ever really discusses what punishment, what it looks like and the severity. We don't talk about what the person can do to make things right or how he or she can address the harms. We're not interested in what happens afterwards. Cancel culture completely erases the idea of redemption or the possibility that someone can change or get better. Once the offender is fired or resigned, we're no longer concerned. Now, maybe I'm biased, but maybe this is a little difficult to translate into the Wild West of the internet. But I worked in a restorative justice diversion program for a couple of years. And people that committed a crime were able to have frank and open conversations with community members impacted by their offense and discuss steps that can be taken in order to, figuratively or literally repair the harm. And I think it's important to utilize this philosophy when someone says or does something problematic. Let's talk it over, let's discuss the impact, let's presume that the person has the capacity to learn and get better. Now, when someone's convicted of a crime, they're sentenced according to guidelines that dictate the severity of the sentence. Once someone completes their sentence, whether it be prison, fines, fees, community service, they've completed their obligation to society and, in theory, can return to a normal life. None of this exists when canceling someone. Should the person get fired? Should the person apologize? Should the person receive criminal charges? These are the discussions that we should have rather than a fire and forget kind of attitude to internet justice. Now, there's a multitude of reasons why cancel culture is so prevalent and popular right now. One idea that I've been toying with is the possibility that it's a substitute or a consequence of a degraded political environment. The left is much too weak to form a cohesive political movement to challenge capital. Without vibrant political organizations like unions, clubs, message boards, there's no real opportunity to have a real debate over serious political topics or participate in politics, even at the local level. In addition, people are stressed, they're tired, they're depressed from the rigors of everyday life, including parenting, jobs, education, and so on. This is why cancel culture is so attractive. It's significantly easier than the slow process of political organizing and political engagement, a process that might not even guarantee success or partial success. Most of the time, you can conveniently call someone out on social media from the comfort of your own home. You're playing on your phone, or maybe you're just sitting on the computer. It's so easy. Moreover, there's the possibility of a quick and decisive action. Maybe XYZ's tweet goes viral. The video is shared hundreds of thousands of times. A picture becomes top post on Reddit. And then it all begins. Central Park Karen gets fired. Some startup CEO resigns. Tom from the 10th floor of your job gets forced out. The professor writes an apology letter. Stuff like that. Perhaps most importantly, cancel culture feeds one's moralistic impulses, especially those in woke circles. At the same time you're calling someone out, there's an element of euphoric self-righteousness from shaming and exposing a bad actor. Okay, so I want to shift gears to a couple of woke phrases. I guess that's what you could call them, and kind of just talk about the problems I have with it. And the first one is the line, quote, the line that goes, "It's not my responsibility to educate you. You have to educate yourself." Now, this has become absolutely annoying when talking about a controversial or difficult subject. If you're really passionate or knowledgeable about a certain, subject or thing, I think you should really help others understand it, especially when they ask for assistance. It's become super fashionable to tell people to Google something or to look it up because there's too much emotional labor in teaching someone. I don't think that's the way to go if you're trying to expand the base and build the political movement necessary to challenge power. The least you can do is try to change someone's mind or maybe just plant the seed. Today's Twitter liberals and activists need to operate from the position of presumed good intention and goodwill. Of course, when you're engaging someone, there's going to be trolls or people who want to sow discord, but that's going to be a part of it. That's kind of the way things are. But there's also going to be people who are genuinely interested that may not have done a lot of reading, or maybe they're just getting into politics. These are the people that we should try to reach out to, that we should try to get onto our side. There's absolutely no need to act like a holier-than-thou elitist that is holding back knowledge from someone. And to be fair, or rather, to be honest, I hate it when people tell me to Google an answer to something when they already know the answer. If I am or someone is reaching out for assistance, they're making an effort to learn about something. For me, when someone tells me to Google something, it makes me want to do it less. I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but for political episodes, I do a lot of reading and try to understand the points the author is making so I can give an informed opinion about the subject. I always try to cite my sources or refer to them in my podcast episodes, and I want to be honest in how I present that information to my listeners so they can get a good grasp of the work and how I feel about it. And, that's the same way I am on Twitter when it comes to political subjects. If someone's asking for help or wants to know more about a certain author or subject, I'll gladly suggest some, authors or scholars or articles that could be useful. If you feel strongly about something, share that passion. Share that knowledge, especially when people are asking for assistance. What do you get from holding back? It just seems like a gigantic ego trip. It's kind of related to the phrase emotional labor. I think that phrase originally referred to employees keeping their feelings and emotions in check when working with members of the public, but now it's come to mean exerting emotional energy when talking about serious or controversial subjects. However, it's really become a tool to get out of a tough and difficult conversation. Now, I don't mean to diminish or discount people's feelings or trauma when a tough subject comes up, but if we're committed to good faith discussion, educating others, changing minds, or hell, even discovering that we might be wrong about something, then we can't say, oh, there's too much emotional labor in educating you, so use Google instead. The next phrase that I want to talk about is the term feeling unsafe. Saying that something makes you feel unsafe is the new "you're a racist" line. It's a rhetorical trick that immediately puts the opponent onto the defensive. Now, certainly, no one wants to be a racist, and no one wants to be an assaulter or someone that makes people feel uncomfortable or make people in fear for their bodies and security. I'm not saying that, people use the word unsafe in a disingenuous way. But if I say, I'm going to kill you, or if I'm going to hurt you, or you better watch out, a reasonable person probably would say that's threatening language, and it would make someone actually feel unsafe and scared. Nevertheless, the whole "I feel unsafe" line is used so much that it kind of lost its meaning. It's like calling someone a fascist. Now, maybe that person's an asshole, maybe they're a jerk, maybe they're a racist, but fascism is a right-wing ideology with some very specific characteristics. The problem with the "I don't feel safe" line is that it's used nowadays to mean I'm not comfortable. And I don't mean I'm not comfortable like you're about to get punched in the face or someone is stalking you, but the discomfort in being placed in a difficult or challenging conversation. Now, it generally happens in social media circles when someone has a controversial or dissenting viewpoint. Someone will claim that they feel unsafe in an attempt to discredit the poster or disengage from the topic. For example, staff at the New York Times objected to the publishing of Senator Tom Cotton's piece about sending in the troops to support police in the George Floyd protests. They claimed that it put black NYT staff in danger. And it's the same thing with the Harper's Ferry letter denouncing ideological conformity. A writer from Vox, that's VOX, stated that by virtue of Matt Iglesias, one of the people that signed on to the Harper's Ferry letter, by virtue of him signing on to that letter that included some bad people or some unscrupulous characters, that it made her feel unsafe. Now listen, I'm all for promoting a healthy and safe environment for discussion. I want people to feel like they can participate, they can talk about sensitive topics without the fear of being attacked, just like cancel culture, not lose their jobs. Yet the whole feeling unsafe thing, I fear, stifles honest and earnest discussion about controversial or difficult topics, especially those regarding race, police violence, politics, and so on. We need to be open to discussing difficult subjects and hearing opposing viewpoints. Rather than feeling unsafe, we should utilize the old intellectual traditions of rigorous debate, discussion, and engage with the ideas being presented rather than backing out. Now, the final phrase I want to talk about is the "check your privilege" line. I don't think people say the phrase "check your privilege" nowadays, but obviously the concept of privilege is still around. The whole "check your privilege" line, I think that feels like it's like 10 years ago. But, regarding privilege, obviously it exists. If you're born with a silver spoon, you're going to have an easier time than someone who grew up poor. You're more likely to go to a good school. Maybe you have more resources to participate in sports and the arts. You could utilize tutors more effectively, network with professionals, have access to healthcare, and so on. So there's no denying that privilege exists. However, my frustration with the whole check your privilege idea stems from the left liberal and activist obsession with conflating privilege and background with legitimacy and voice. I talked about this concept in my podcast a couple of months ago about the tendencies of contemporary left liberals. Now, of course, we want to listen to the voices of the oppressed and ensure that they're being heard. Poor, working class people, marginalized people, sometimes they don't have a voice on the table or are being ignored. So I get the concern that we need to amplify their voices. See, that's also another phrase that I hate, amplify their voices. Yet, we automatically discount someone's opinion based on their identity and background or the opposite. We promote them due to what they identify as. You're not an undocumented black Muslim trans female? Oh, sorry, we're not going to listen to you. You lived in a safe neighborhood in a nice big house? Sorry, your opinion is worthless. Now, this isn't to say that someone with a privileged background may have experienced or witnessed misogyny, racism, or prejudice, unlike other vulnerable populations, but to ascribe authority purely based on one's background, sexual orientation, gender, sex, ethnicity is a bit absurd. If someone's interested in the goals of the movement or the organization, they should be able to fully participate, not relegated to abstract notions of allyship or deference to leadership. This is how we build the coalitions, the alliances, and the members needed to affect change and put pressure on political leaders. Activists, left liberals, and even leftists nowadays are too concerned with ensuring total ideological conformity and a checkbox approach to building a movement where everybody needs to agree on everything and kind of in an effort to be this the most pure and wholesome movement as possible. I just think that's a recipe for self-sabotage and sectarianism based off moralistic and identitarian lines. I always use the Bernie Sanders example because it showed the potential of what a movement could be. Now, sure, he didn't win the nomination, but he showed that the base is out there. We just have to build it and strengthen it. There were a variety of different interest groups that came together to support social democracy, public goods model, democratic socialism, whatever you want to call Bernie Sanders' platform. There were labor groups, civil rights groups, unions, clergy, but most importantly, I think, independents and even conservatives. It would be insane to expect that all these groups would agree on every single issue, especially things like criminal justice reform, immigration, gay marriage, gun rights, abortion, etc. Rather than gatekeeping, or as Professor Cornel West puts it, having a closing of ranks mentality, we need to have a political organization that tries or strives to be as inclusive as possible to get the numbers needed to affect legislative change. Now, additionally, this whole obsession with identitarian factors and who gets to speak or lead the movement is completely unproductive for building the forces needed to confront elites. We should be thinking about how to utilize people's skills rather than their supposed victimhood or oppression. Administrative skills, public speaking, organizational ability, charisma, passion, enthusiasm, writing ability, these are all critical aspects for developing a political base. And hell, in my opinion, more important than demographics. I know I'm going on a tangent here, but the privilege concept is just beyond absurd if you think about historical movements and political leaders. Karl Marx received a PhD, Friedrich Engels was the son of a wealthy family that owned textile factories, and Mao Zedong came from a relatively wealthy peasant family. Vladimir Lenin and Fidel Castro studied law. Che Guevara was born into a middle-class family and a medical student. Gandhi studied law in England. So basically what I'm trying to say is, if these political leaders and activists argued all day about who has white privilege and who is the most oppressed, nothing would have ever happened, and these movements would have been destroyed by infighting over the most mundane grievances. So we should acknowledge that privilege exists, which I'm sure a lot of people do. But we should be open to people who support your agenda, a left agenda, a progressive agenda, what have you, irrespective of personal background. If you're bringing the skills, the tools, or just plain enthusiasm or curiosity, you should be able to participate and fully engage in a political movement.